The Crucible is a play by Arthur Miller that takes place in Salem, Massachusetts in 1692. It is based on the true story of the witch trials that occurred during this time period. The play follows a group of young girls who are caught dancing in the woods by the town minister, Reverend Paris. To avoid punishment, they claim to have been bewitched by several members of the community, setting off a chain of events that lead to mass hysteria and the death of many innocent people. The play explores themes of fear, hysteria, and the consequence of blending following authority. As the girls' accusation of witchcraft spread, the entire town is consumed by a sense of paranoia and suspicion. Many people are arrested and put on trial, and some are even executed. The girls continue to accuse more people. One of the main characters in the play is John Proctor, a farmer who has had an affair with Abigail Williams, one of the girls leading in the accusations. Proctor tries to expose the girls' lies and stop the madness, but his own past mistakes make it difficult for him to be taken seriously. His wife Elizabeth is also accused of being witchcraft, and he's torn between saving her and telling the truth. The play highlights the danger of groupthink and the importance of standing up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming oppositions. It also explores the power of reputation and how far people will go to protect it. As more and more innocent people are accused and executed, the town begins to realize the error of its ways. In the end, Proctor refused the falsely confessed to witchcraft and instead chose to die with integrity, preserving his honor and dignity. Overall, The Crucible is a power commentary on the dangers of ignorance and the importance of speaking out against injustice. It reminds us that we must always question authority and never let fear and hysteria cloud our judgment.
The Crucible is a tragedy that features the tragic hero John Proctor, who ultimately brings on his own demise because of his fatal flaw of adultery. Tragedies are plays that depict human suffering and showcase a main character that is brought down by their own flaws. The tragic hero is an example of one of the genre conventions used in the play, and this character is typically portrayed as a great man with a tragic flaw. John Proctor's character fits a lot of the common qualities found in Shakespeare's examples of a tragic hero. For example, Proctor is someone from a high estate, and he is someone important and significant in the town. His behavior towards other people has earned him respect and even partly fear, which fits the role of the tragic hero very well. Another trait of the tragic hero is the fatal flaw that contributes to their own destruction. In John Proctor's case, his lust is his fatal flaw. Due to Proctor's lust outside of his marriage, he has an affair with Abigail, which directly results in his downfall. Proctor gains this sort of obsession with trying to take down Abigail and preserve his reputation, which ends up being another contributive factor to his success and his failure. Throughout the play, John Proctor feels a heavy sense of guilt for his infidelity, and because of this, he keeps his affair with Abigail a secret, and only confesses his sins when it's too late and the damage has already been done. Proctor's obsession with trying to save face does not fit him well when his wife is called upon in the courtroom to testify, because she believed that Proctor would not so easily throw away all his hard work of trying to keep his reputation intact, and she ends up lying for him. Although Proctor is able to redeem himself at the end of the play when he refuses to dishonor himself and confess after he is arrested, but it came at the cost of his life, and he dies like many other tragic heroes. The final part of this genre convention is that the character often meets their death at the end of the story, and it leaves the audience with a feeling of sadness or waste. Tragedies are meant to showcase human suffering in a way that is very real because we often inflict pain upon ourselves with our own actions. Tragedies are meant to show that tragedy can happen anywhere and that it creates waste, and this genre convention of the tragic hero displays that.
The historical context of Arthur Miller's Crucible goes all the way back to 1692, when the actual Salem witch trials took place in Massachusetts. This was the time when some of the first settlers came to America. At this time, there was a girl named Anne Putman, Similarly to the play, Anne was a real person who was responsible for accusing a few people from Salem for consorting with Satan and holding black Sabbaths. There was also an actual Reverend Parris named Samuel Parris, who was in charge and responsible for the prosecution of many alleged witches, 19 of which were hung and one even pressed to death. The way that Arthur Miller uses this historical moment is to show just what happens when irrational fears and superstition obstructs human intuition. At the time this play was written, America was in a heated geopolitical tension with Russia, also known as the Communists. Since after World War II, the alliance with Russia seemed to become more and more unstable. This is when McCarthyism came about. During this time of McCarthyism, any suspicion of alliance or kindness towards communism was severely looked down upon, so much so that people would go out of their way to make sure that their neighbors or fellow colleagues were not actually just communists in disguise. If you were found to have any such affiliation towards communism, your reputation would be severely diminished. This is very similar to the Crucible, since at the time, people were controlled by mass hysteria and superstition to the point where they would accuse their own neighbor of being a witch if it meant that they would be safe. I also think that the Crucible still holds up today, and even more so now in this geopolitical time. With news sources and social media being able to show us false information, the power that superstition has is immense. And it is almost our human nature to blame others for something in order to protect ourselves and our reputations.
In the setting of Salem during the witch trials, Arthur Miller wanted to take real-life themes that happened during these trials and during the Red Scare and highlight them throughout this play. The biggest theme highlighted in this play, in my opinion, is individuality and community. Back when Salem was first being established, it was a town of religion and strictness. They saw individuality as a threat and tried to extinguish it since it posed a threat to the foundation of their society and government. As the idea of witchcraft is brought in by the girls in the play, the townspeople and judges try to get rid of it immediately. The witch trials and witch hunt that takes place gave them a way to release their frustration and label it as morality, and it also provided the girls a way to do what they want with who they wanted and to cover it up. The girls helped feed into the feeling of fear because they knew if they pushed all the right buttons, they could get those they wanted to be gone, like, for example, John Proctor and Tituba. Their society became more and more corrupted to the point where individuals with opposing opinions or views that were not seen as valid. Abigail knew that standing alone doesn't get many results as it does when you stand with others, so she starts to build her own little community to hide her own individuality and her feelings and make them appear as normal for all the other girls. Likewise, as John Proctor tried to reach out and speak the truth, the townspeople were so obsessed with and blinded by the girls and their witchcraft that they didn't see his honesty and his individual voice as it truly was. Individuality is such a beautiful thing and should be celebrated, but in this case, it wasn't a celebration, it was a factor of condemnation.
So there are about 5 characters in The Crucible that are absolutely essential to this plot. And the first one is John Proctor. He is the protagonist, we could call. He's actually a pretty good guy, and he's hardworking and is respected, but he has one big problem, and that is that he had an affair with a 17-year-old, and he's in his 30s. So that's not very smart of John. Him being a good guy, he has to make the decision on whether he should protect himself and stay silent about the affair or do the right thing and talk about the affair at the trial and save everybody who's innocent. In the end, he ends up being convicted of witchcraft and is hung, which is really just a Debbie Downer for him. The next character is actually John Proctor's wife. She is a very good woman, very proper, very moral, and yet she is not willing to forgive John for the affair. During the trial, though, she does show up and lies about his affair for him, even though it does end up backfiring. But she ends up forgiving John for the affair, but then is also hanged. So that's 2 for 2. The next character is the 17-year-old who sleeps with the 30-year-old, Miss Abigail Williams, who we could honestly say she is the antagonist. She wants to be with John, of course, and wants to kick Elizabeth out of the marriage, so she accuses multiple people, including Elizabeth, of the witchcraft, and then that is what ultimately gets Elizabeth hung after she gives birth to her child. So Abigail's just a bad character in total because of her lying and her just being a bad person. So the next person is Reverend Samuel Parris. He is the Reverend, and he is more of just an egotistical man. So he tries to make sure that everything ends up in his favor, which honestly, that really does suck for everybody else. The next character is Reverend John Hale. He's actually pretty smart and is a quote-unquote trained witch hunter, and he thinks that he's all that, unquote. But in the end, he ends up lying as well, just like every other character. And we just see that most of these characters are really just bad people. And that's honestly really sad, but that's the way the cookie crumbles, folks.